He went to the hospital to take care of the woman who represented his perfect life, but he left facing the past he tried to erase in the eyes of his ex and in the arms of a son he never knew existed. If you like stories like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel. We post every day. Continuing, the air conditioning at Mount Sinai Hospital whispered at an almost imperceptible frequency, as if even the climate control respected the reverent silence that surrounded the marble corridors. Ethan Sterling adjusted the cuff of his Italian dress shirt for the third time in less than 5 minutes, an automatic gesture that betrayed the anxiety he tried to hide behind his erect posture and controlled expression. At 34, he had learned that showing nervousness was a luxury men in his position couldn't afford. The pharmaceutical empire, Sterling Roads Pharmaceuticals, didn't tolerate weakness, even from the air, especially from the air. Victoria had been in surgery for 3 hours, a refinement rhinoplasty, as she had explained with the casualness of someone scheduling a haircut. So the wedding photos will be perfect, she had justified, distractedly fiddling with the engagement ring that had cost more than an apartment on the Upper East Side. Ethan had smiled and agreed, as he always did, as he had always done during their 2-year relationship that felt like it had lasted 2 decades. His relationship with Victoria Davenport had all the qualities his father approved of. She was the heiress of a blue-blood New York family, had a law degree from Harvard, a master's from the Sorbonne, and was fluent in 4 languages. She possessed the kind of classic beauty that photographed well in society magazines, and the calculated intelligence needed to navigate the social circles of America's elite. She was, in short, the perfect wife for a man destined to command one of the largest pharmaceutical conglomerates in North America. She was also profoundly unhappy, just like him. Ethan was walking down the main hallway when his phone vibrated. A work message, undoubtedly urgent, like all the others he received every 15 minutes. He decided to ignore it and kept walking, with no specific destination, just trying to dissipate the restlessness growing in his chest. There was something suffocating about the sterile environment, something that made him question choices he seemed to have made in a past life. That's when he turned left toward the pediatric wing. There was no logical reason to be there. Victoria's surgery was happening in a completely different wing. But his steps led him down corridors decorated with colorful drawings and cartoon characters, where the silence of high-end medicine gave way to the sounds of life in its purest form. Babies crying, children laughing, the soft voices of mothers soothing their children. Ethan's heart nearly stopped when he saw her. Chloe Davis was walking toward him, wearing the white lab coat he knew so well, carrying a newborn wrapped in a light blue blanket. Her brown hair was pulled back in a casual bun, a few rebellious strands escaping around her face. She looked thinner, more tired, but there was something in her eyes he didn't remember seeing before. A quiet strength, a determination that made her radiate a different kind of beauty, more mature, more real. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, they just looked at each other in silence. The world around them disappeared. There was no more hospital, no more Victoria in the operating room, no more weight of inheritance and family expectations. There was only her, only him, and the baby she held with the care of someone protecting the most precious thing in the universe. "Chloe," he said, his voice coming out weaker than he intended. She stopped, her body visibly tensing. Her eyes, which had been shining with the quiet joy of someone who had just left a small patient in the care of a loving mother, now reflected a complex mix of pain, surprise, and something Ethan couldn't immediately identify. Ethan. The name sounded strange in her voice, as if she had to force her memory to recall how to pronounce it. For over 2 years, she had said his name in 1,000 different ways, with affection in the morning, with desire in the middle of the night, with anger during fights, with longing during goodbyes. Now it sounded like a word in a foreign language. You work here now?" he asked, trying to sound casual, as if he weren't memorizing every detail of her face. "I'm a pediatric resident for the last 8 months. 8 months. The answer hit him like a punch to the gut. 8 months ago they were still together. 8 months ago he still believed he might have enough courage to stand up to his father and fight for what he felt. 8 months ago, his life was completely different. And this? Ethan made a discreet gesture toward the baby, trying to seem merely polite, but unable to hide the way his eyes were fixed on the child. Chloe hugged the baby a little tighter against her chest, an instinctive protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed. "This is Miguel," she said, her voice taking on a tenderness impossible to disguise. "My son." The words echoed in Ethan's ears like thunder. He stared at the baby more intently, noticing details that had seemed irrelevant before. The line of the jaw, the shape of the ears, the color of the eyes that were beginning to define a shade between green and brown. Features he knew well, because he saw them in the mirror every day. "Your son," he repeated, more a confirmation than a question. "Yes." Chloe didn't look away. There was a wounded dignity in her posture, as if she were preparing for a battle she had already fought many times in her own mind. Ethan felt the weight of realization crash down on him like an avalanche. He counted back in his head. She'd been working here for 8 months. The baby looked to be about 2 or 3 months old. The math added up in a way that made his world crumble. "Chloe, Don't," she interrupted him, her voice firm but not aggressive. "Not here." She glanced around, remembering where they were. The pediatric wing was a place of hope, of healing, of new beginnings. It was no place for settling scores with the past. "You're right," Ethan agreed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of restrained desperation. "But we need to talk." "Do we?" Chloe raised an eyebrow, and for the first time since they'd met again, Ethan glimpsed a bit of the strong, defiant woman he had known. "Where was this need to talk 8 months ago, when I tried to talk to you?" The question hit him hard. Ethan remembered that time perfectly. He remembered the unanswered calls, the unread messages, the cruel way he had ended the relationship based on evidence he now suspected was false. He remembered the look of despair on her face the last time they saw each other, when she had tried to explain something he had refused to hear. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice heavy with a guilt he'd been carrying for months. "Completely wrong." "Wrong about what, specifically?" Chloe asked, and Ethan realized she wasn't going to make this easy for him, nor should she. "About you, about us, about everything." Miguel started to stir in his mother's arms, making small sounds that indicated he was waking up. Chloe automatically began to rock him gently, a movement so natural that Ethan felt a pang of pain realizing all he had missed. "Do you have other children?" he asked, knowing the answer could completely destroy him. "No," Chloe replied, looking directly at him. "Just Miguel." Relief and despair mingled in Ethan's chest. Relief because there was no other man sharing this fatherhood. Despair because it meant he had abandoned his own son. "Chloe, I need you to know that I didn't know. If I had known about the pregnancy—" "You would have done what?" She cut him off again, this time with bitter irony. "Would you have defied your father, stood up to your family? Would you have chosen the poor doctor over the rich heiress?" Each question was a sharp blade cutting through the excuses Ethan was trying to form. Because Chloe was right. Even if he had known about the pregnancy back then, he probably would have reacted the same way. He didn't have enough courage to face Arthur Sterling and the full weight of family tradition. He started but couldn't finish the sentence. "Exactly," Chloe said, interpreting his silence. "You wouldn't have done anything different, because you've always been too much of a coward to fight for what you really wanted." The words hurt because they were true. Ethan had spent his entire life being molded by the expectations of others, especially his father. He had chosen the college major his father approved of, taken positions in the family company without question, maintained relationships that benefited the family business. With Chloe, for the first time, he had tasted freedom, his own choice, genuine love, and he had thrown it all away at the first sign of resistance. Miguel started to cry, a low whimper that made Chloe automatically whisper words of comfort. Ethan watched the interaction, fascinated and devastated at the same time. There was an intimacy between mother and son that completely excluded him, an established routine, a bond that had formed in his absence. "He looks like me," Ethan murmured, more to himself than to her. Yes, Chloe admitted, not trying to deny the obvious, especially when he's annoyed. For a moment, almost like a reflex, she smiled. It was just for a second, but Ethan saw a flash of the woman he had loved, the woman he still loved, beneath all the hurt and justified resentment. "Can I?" He hesitantly reached a hand toward the baby, but Chloe instinctively pulled back. "No," she said, and the firmness in her voice made it clear. It wasn't a "not right now," but a definitive no. "You lost that right." Ethan felt as if he'd been slapped, but he knew he deserved it. He had lost much more than the right to touch his son. He had lost the chance to be there during the pregnancy, to support Chloe through the hard times, to be the first to hold Miguel when he was born. He had lost precious months he could never get back. "Chloe, at least let me explain." "Explain what?" she asked, her voice starting to show signs of emotional exhaustion. "How you so easily believed I was cheating on you. How you preferred to listen to others instead of trusting me. How you treated me like trash and kicked me out of your life without even giving me a chance to defend myself." Each accusation was a painful reminder of how Ethan had behaved in those last days of their relationship. The photos someone had shown him, the intercepted conversations, the emails that seemed to prove a betrayal he was now sure had never happened. It had all seemed so real at the time, but now he realized how he had been manipulated. "I know you tried to talk to me about the pregnancy," he said, his voice heavy with remorse. "I remember the last time we saw each other. You said you had something important to tell me, but you were too busy humiliating me to listen," Chloe finished the sentence for him. "You were too convinced I was a gold digger, an opportunist who had gotten involved with you for money." Ethan closed his eyes, remembering the cruelty of his words on that occasion. He had said terrible things he knew would hurt deeply because he wanted her to leave and never come back. He had gotten exactly what he wanted, and now he realized it was the biggest mistake of his life. "My father was right about you," he had said in that last conversation, remembering with painful clarity. "You're exactly the kind of woman I should avoid." The memory made him feel sick. Chloe had tried to respond, had tried to explain something, but he hadn't wanted to listen. He was too hurt, too convinced he'd been betrayed, too influenced by the evidence that had been presented to him. "You tried to tell me about Miguel that day," Ethan said, more a confirmation than a question. "I tried," Chloe confirmed, her voice now lower, filled with an old sadness. "But you were so sure I was a gold digger that you didn't even give me a chance to speak. You were so convinced I had cheated on you that you never even considered the possibility you might be wrong." Miguel had stopped crying and was now looking curiously at Ethan, his little, unfocused eyes trying to make out who this man talking to his mother was. Ethan felt an immediate, overwhelming connection to the child, a paternal instinct he had never experienced before. "How old are you, little guy?" he murmured, addressing the baby more than Chloe. 3 months, she answered. "He was born on July 15th. Ethan quickly did the math. 3 months ago, he was in the thick of preparations for his engagement to Victoria. The party had taken place at the end of July, 2 weeks after the birth of the son he didn't know existed. While he was toasting with French champagne in a luxurious ballroom, surrounded by people pretending to care about his happiness, Chloe was at home, alone, taking care of a newborn. "You went through it all alone," he said, and it wasn't a question. "Not completely alone," Chloe corrected, and Ethan felt a pang of jealousy. "I had help from friends, co-workers, my family, but not from me." "No," she confirmed, simply and devastatingly honest. "Not from you." Ethan wanted to ask about the birth, about the first few days, about how she had managed to balance her medical residency with single motherhood. He wanted to know if she had suffered, if she had needed anything, if there were moments she wished he had been there, but he knew he had no right to ask any of those questions. "Why didn't you try to find me afterward?" he asked, though he knew the question was unfair. Chloe looked at him with an expression that mixed disbelief with restrained anger. "After how you treated me, after the things you said, after you made it clear I meant nothing to you?" She shook her head. "I have self-respect, Ethan. I may have been foolish enough to believe you loved me, but I'm not a masochist. The truth hurt, but Ethan knew he deserved every word. He had destroyed not only their relationship, but also the trust and self-worth of an extraordinary woman. He had made it clear he considered her inferior, unworthy, manipulative. How could he expect her to come back after that? "You were right about one thing," Chloe continued, adjusting Miguel in her arms. "We are from different worlds. But you were wrong about the reason. It's not because I'm poor and you're rich. It's because you're a coward, and I learned how to be brave." The words echoed down the hall like a final verdict. Ethan wanted to argue, to defend himself, to explain that he had changed. But looking at Chloe, seeing the strength and dignity in her posture, he realized he didn't even deserve the chance to try. "Chloe, he began, but was interrupted by a familiar female voice. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" He turned and saw Victoria walking down the hall, still in her hospital gown, her face bandaged but visibly lucid. She had woken up from the anesthesia earlier than expected and had come looking for him. "Tori," he said, trying to hide the desperation in his voice. "How are you feeling?" "Fine considering," she replied, but her eyes were fixed on Chloe and the baby. "Who is she?" Chloe and Ethan looked at each other, both knowing this moment would change everything. There was no way to pretend they were just acquaintances who had run into each other. There was no way to hide the tension in the air, the shared history, the child who bore unmistakable physical traits. "Victoria, this is Chloe Davis," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Chloe, this is Victoria Davenport, my fiancée." "Fiancée," Chloe repeated, as if testing the taste of the word. She looked at the ostentatious ring on Victoria's hand, then at Ethan. "Congratulations." There was irony in the sentiment, but also genuine pain. Ethan realized that, despite all the resentment, a part of Chloe still cared about him, which made everything even more painful. "Thank you," Victoria replied, still studying the situation. "And is this beautiful baby yours?" "Yes," Chloe answered, instinctively protective. "This is Miguel." Victoria moved closer to get a better look at the child, and Ethan watched her face for signs of recognition. She was an intelligent woman. It wouldn't take her long to notice the similarities. "He's adorable," Victoria commented, genuinely charmed. "How many months?" "3," Chloe replied, exchanging a tense look with Ethan. Victoria quickly did the math, and Ethan saw the exact moment she understood. Her eyes widened slightly, then fixed on Ethan's face, then went back to Miguel, then to Chloe. 3 months, she repeated, her voice lower. "Victoria," Ethan began, but she held up a hand for silence. "Ethan, can we talk in private?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. "Of course," he agreed, knowing he had no choice. "It was interesting to meet you, Chloe," Victoria said, maintaining social politeness but with a noticeable chill. "You too," Chloe replied. Ethan took one last look at Chloe and Miguel, trying to memorize the image, trying to burn into his mind every detail of the son he had just discovered. Chloe avoided his gaze, concentrating on calming the baby, who was starting to stir again. As he walked down the hall beside Victoria, Ethan felt that his life had completely changed in a matter of minutes. The encounter with Chloe had shattered all the certainties he had tried to build over the past few months. The discovery of Miguel had awakened feelings he didn't know he possessed, and the expression on Victoria's face made it clear that the conversation they were about to have would be anything but pleasant. The future that had seemed so certain an hour ago was now completely up in the air. Ethan knew he would have to make difficult decisions, face painful consequences, and possibly lose everything he had built. But for the first time in years, he felt he was walking toward the truth, not running from it, even if that truth could destroy him completely. The private recovery suite where Victoria would spend the next few hours cost more than most Americans make in a year. Ethan observed the luxurious details of the room: fine wood furniture, a state-of-the-art television, a bathroom with marble finishes, and felt a strange dissonance. Until that morning, this kind of opulence had seemed natural, deserved. Now, after seeing Chloe in the halls of the pediatric wing, every extravagant detail felt like a reminder of privileges he may never have truly earned. Victoria settled into the imported armchair, still wearing her hospital gown, her bandaged face giving her a vulnerable appearance that contrasted with the firmness in her eyes. She waited for him to close the door and sit in, the chair beside her before she spoke. "So," she said, her voice controlled but laced with a tension Ethan knew well. "Are you going to explain who that woman is? And don't even think about lying, Ethan. I'm not an idiot." Ethan ran his hands over his face, trying to buy time to organize his thoughts. During their 2-year relationship, he had always been honest with Victoria about his past, including Chloe. She knew there had been a great love before her, a relationship that had ended badly. But he had never gone into detail, and Victoria had never asked. Perhaps because deep down, they both knew their engagement was more of a social contract than a union based on passion. "That's Chloe," he said finally. "The woman I told you about, the one I dated before I met you." "And the baby?" Victoria asked, getting straight to the point. "You don't have to be a genius to see that child has your eyes, your chin, your ears." The observation hit Ethan like a fist. Victoria had noticed in a few minutes what he had been trying to process since their reunion in the hallway. "I didn't know," he said, his voice weaker than he intended. "I swear, Victoria, I had no idea she was pregnant when we broke up." "When you broke up, or when you broke up with her?" Victoria asked, showing she knew Ethan better than he thought. The distinction was painful, but accurate. Ethan had been the one to end the relationship, unilaterally and cruelly. "When I broke up with her," he admitted. "But I had reasons to—" "What reasons?" Victoria interrupted. "And don't be vague, Ethan. If we're going to stay together, if we're going to get married in 3 months, I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with." Ethan hesitated. Telling Victoria about the supposed evidence of Chloe's infidelity would mean exposing how he had been manipulated, how he had been unable to trust the woman he loved, how he had allowed others to influence his most intimate decisions. It meant admitting weakness, insecurity, cowardice. "I thought she was cheating on me," he said finally. "I was shown photos, conversations, evidence that seemed to prove she was involved with another man." "Who showed you?" Victoria asked, and Ethan realized she was building a case. "People from the company, security staff," he answered vaguely. "On whose orders?" Ethan fell silent. He knew where this line of questioning was leading, and he didn't want to admit the truth, even to himself. "Your father's," Victoria finished when he didn't answer. "It was Arthur who orchestrated this, wasn't it?" The question sounded like an accusation, and Ethan felt the weight of his unconscious complicity. All his life, he had allowed his father to control his decisions from the simplest to the most important. Arthur Sterling didn't just run the family's pharmaceutical empire, he also ran his son's personal life with an iron fist. He was protecting the family's interests, Ethan said, the words sounding hollow even to him. "Protecting them from what?" Victoria questioned. "From you being happy? From you choosing who you want to spend your life with?" "Chloe isn't one of us," Ethan tried to explain, repeating arguments he had heard so many times from his father. "She comes from a simple family. She couldn't contribute to the business, to the social connections." "And I contribute?" Victoria asked, the irony evident in her voice. "Or am I just a convenient piece on your father's chessboard?" The question caught Ethan off guard. He looked at Victoria, really looked at her, for the first time in a long time. He saw an intelligent, cultured, beautiful woman who deserved much more than a marriage of convenience disguised as a romance. He saw someone who, just like him, was being manipulated to serve greater interests. "Victoria, that's not it. Don't insult me with lies," she cut him off. "Do you love me, Ethan?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Ethan opened his mouth to give the automatic answer, the expected answer, but the words wouldn't come, because he knew Victoria didn't deserve a lie, especially not now. "I admire you," he said finally. "I enjoy being with you. I respect you." "But you don't love me," she completed, her voice taking on a sadness Ethan had never noticed before. "No," he admitted, feeling as if he were confessing to a crime. "Not in the way you deserve to be loved." Victoria was silent for a long moment, absorbing the confession. When she spoke again, her voice was surprisingly calm. "And you love her, Chloe." It wasn't a question. It was a statement based on observing how Ethan had reacted to the reunion. The way his eyes had lit up when he saw his ex-girlfriend, the way he had been devastated to discover the existence of his son. "Yes," Ethan admitted, feeling an immense weight lift from his shoulders. "I never stopped loving her." "And yet you were going to marry me." I thought I could build something solid with you, something based on mutual respect, compatibility, common goals." "A marriage of convenience," Victoria summarized, without rancor, simply stating a fact. "That's not how I saw it," Ethan defended himself, but he knew she was right. "No, Ethan, that's exactly how you saw it. You just didn't have the courage to admit it." Victoria stood up from the armchair, walking to the window that offered a panoramic view of the city. "The question is, do you have the courage to admit it now?" Ethan watched her in silence. Victoria had always been a strong, decisive woman, but there was something different in her posture at that moment, as if confronting the truth had freed her from something. "You don't love me either," he said, more a realization than an accusation. "No," she agreed without turning to look at him. "I tried. For 2 years I tried to convince myself that what I felt for you was enough. But love isn't something you can build through sheer willpower." "Then why did you agree to marry me?" Victoria laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the luxurious room. "For the same reasons you asked me. Because it was expected, convenient, safe. Because my parents approved, because your family approved, because everyone said we were perfect for each other." "And we're not?" "On paper we are." She turned to face him. "In real life we're two strangers who tried to convince ourselves that compatibility is the same thing as love." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with revelations they both already knew but had never had the courage to voice. Ethan felt strangely relieved, as if he could finally breathe after years of holding his breath. "What do we do now?" he asked. "You go back to her," Victoria said, as if it were obvious. "Fight for your son, for the woman you love, for the life you really want. And you? I free myself from a marriage that would have been a lie for both of us." Ethan stood up and walked over to where Victoria was standing. For the first time since they had met, he felt a genuine connection with her, based not on social compatibility, but on mutual honesty. "Victoria, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice filled with guilt. "You deserved so much more than this." "We both did," she corrected, "and now we have a chance to find what we really deserve." "My father is going to be furious," Ethan said, more to himself than to her. "Your father will survive," Victoria replied firmly. "The question is, will you have the courage to stand up to him?" It was the question Ethan had been avoiding his entire life. Arthur Sterling was a ruthless man who had built an empire through determination, cruelty when necessary, and absolute control over every aspect of his life and his family's. Confronting him meant risking everything: the inheritance, the position in the company, the social status, the financial security. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "I've never really stood up to my father." "Then maybe it's time to start," Victoria said, removing the engagement ring from her finger. "If you really want to win Chloe back, if you want to be a father to your son, you're going to have to prove you've changed. And that means stop being a puppet on Arthur's strings." She held the ring out to Ethan, who took it with trembling hands. The piece had cost a fortune, but at that moment, it seemed like just a piece of metal and stone, empty of any emotional meaning. "Victoria," he began, wanting to thank her, to apologize, to explain something, but the words failed him. "You don't have to say anything," she interrupted. "Just don't waste this second chance. Chloe went through a pregnancy alone because of you. Your son is growing up without knowing his father. You have a lot to make up for." Ethan put the ring in his pocket, knowing that the gesture symbolized much more than the end of an engagement. It symbolized the end of an era, of a way of life based on the expectations of others. "And you, what will you do?" he asked. I'm going to recover from this surgery, explain to my family what happened, and start living my own life. Victoria smiled for the first time since they had entered the room. Maybe I'll travel the world, maybe I'll dedicate myself to the arts, maybe I'll find someone who truly loves me. You will, Ethan said with sincerity. You're an extraordinary woman, Victoria. Any man would be lucky to have you. Including you, if you weren't in love with someone else. Ethan agreed with a nod. In other circumstances, Victoria would have truly been a perfect partner. But love doesn't follow logic or convenience. I'll let you rest, he said, walking toward the door. Ethan, she called before he left. When you face your father, remember one thing. You're 34 years old. It's time to stop asking for permission to live your own life. Ethan nodded and left the room, carrying with him the weight of the revelations and the responsibility of the decisions he would have to make. The hospital corridor seemed different now, less opulent, more real. He knew the confrontation with Arthur would be inevitable, but before that he needed to process everything he had discovered on this transformative morning. His phone vibrated again. This time, it was a call from his father. Ethan, where are you? Arthur's voice came through the phone with its usual authority. We have a meeting with the Japanese investors in an hour. You here? Dad, I need to talk to you, Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. Talk about what? Anything can wait until after the meeting. It can't, Ethan insisted. It's about Chloe. The silence on the other end of the line was eloquent. Arthur knew exactly what his son was talking about. Where are you? Arthur asked, his voice lower. At Mount Sinai. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Don't move. The call ended without a goodbye. Ethan knew the next few minutes would be crucial for the rest of his life. For the first time in decades, he would have to face the man who had always controlled every aspect of his existence. While he waited, Ethan walked the halls again, this time consciously looking for Chloe. He needed to see her one more time, needed to try to explain, needed to at least apologize properly. But she had disappeared, probably back to work, continuing her routine of saving lives while he tried to pick up the pieces of his own shattered one. 15 minutes later, as promised, Arthur Sterling arrived at the hospital. At 62, he still radiated the authority and power that had built an empire. Dressed in an impeccable suit, his grey hair perfectly combed, his erect posture showing no sign of age, he walked through the corridors as if he owned the place. Ethan met him in the main lobby, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel the automatic need to straighten up, to adjust his posture, to prepare himself to please. Instead, he felt a mix of anger and determination he had never experienced before. We'll talk in the car, Arthur said without a greeting. No, Ethan replied, surprising them both. We'll talk right here. Arthur raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. They moved to a more private corner of the lobby, away from prying ears. So, Arthur said, crossing his arms, you found her. It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation that Arthur knew exactly where Chloe was, what she was doing, and probably even about Miguel's existence. You knew, Ethan said, feeling the anger swell in his chest. You always knew she was pregnant. Of course I knew, Arthur answered without a hint of remorse. It's my job to know everything that could affect this family. And you didn't think it was relevant to tell me I had a son. Relevant for what? Arthur questioned coldly. So you could make the stupid mistake of throwing everything away for a woman who isn't right for you? The words hit Ethan like slaps. It wasn't just the contempt with which his father spoke of Chloe. It was the total lack of consideration for his son's feelings, for fatherhood, for moral responsibility. That woman has a name, Ethan said, trying to control his voice, and that child is your grandson. That child is a problem that can be solved, Arthur replied with the same coldness. And that woman is an opportunist who tried to use you to climb the social ladder. You lied to me, Ethan accused, finally connecting all the pieces. The photos, the conversations, the evidence of the supposed affair, you made it all up. I protected you from a decision that would have destroyed your future. You destroyed my future, Ethan exploded, losing all control. You made me abandon the woman I love, miss months of my son's life, get engaged to a woman I don't love. You destroyed everything." People in the lobby started to look their way, but Ethan didn't care. 34 years of submission, of blind obedience, of fear of confrontation were being unleashed all at once. "I saved you from a life of mediocrity," Arthur retorted, keeping his voice low but filled with authority. 10 years from now, you'll thank me." "No," Ethan said, the certainty in his voice unshakable. "I won't. Because 10 years from now, if I keep following your orders, I'll be an empty man, married to a woman I don't love, pretending to be happy in a life I didn't choose." "And you think you'll be happy playing house with some poor doctor?" Arthur questioned with contempt. "Do you think love pays the bills, Ethan? Do you think passion builds empires?" "I think a life without love isn't worth living," Ethan replied, surprised by his own conviction. "And I think I've wasted far too much time trying to please you." "You're making a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your life. The only mistake I made was letting you control my life for so long," Ethan said, pulling the engagement ring from his pocket. "Victoria and I are done. There's not going to be a wedding." Arthur looked at the ring as if it were a bomb about to go off. "This is temporary," he said, trying to maintain control. "You'll work things out. You'll reschedule the wedding." "No," Ethan interrupted him. "It's over, Dad. The engagement, the charade, the attempt to control me. It's all over." "Ethan, you're being emotional. Let's go home. We'll talk calmly." "I'm not going home," Ethan said, knowing that each word took him further from any possibility of return. "And I'm not working at the company anymore." The declaration caught Arthur off guard. His eyes widened slightly, the first sign that he had lost control of the situation. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I quit. The company, the inheritance, everything," Ethan said, feeling a dizzying sense of freedom. "I'm going to try to win Chloe back. I'm going to try to be a father to my son, and I'm going to do it far away from you." "You have no idea what you're doing," Arthur said, his voice starting to show signs of desperation. "Without the company, without the family, you're nothing. You'll end up waiting tables, washing dishes, living like any other bum." "Maybe," Ethan admitted, "but at least I'll be living my own life." Arthur was silent for a long moment, processing the magnitude of his son's rebellion. When he spoke again, his voice had regained its usual coldness. "You have 24 hours to change your mind," he said. "After that, there's no going back. If you walk out that door now, if you quit the company, don't expect me to take you back when you realize you've made a mistake." "I'm not going to change my mind," Ethan said, turning to leave. "Ethan," Arthur called one last time. "Do you really think she'll take you back after everything you did to her?" The question hit Ethan at his most vulnerable point, because it was true. There was no guarantee Chloe would forgive him. In fact, considering the pain he had caused, it was very likely she would reject him completely. "Maybe not," he admitted, turning to face his father one last time. "But I have to try, because for the first time in my life I'm going to fight for something I really want." "And if she says no?" Ethan thought about the question, picturing the possibility of Chloe refusing any attempt at reconciliation. The prospect was terrifying, but it didn't change his decision. "Then, at least I'll know I tried," he said, "and I'll still be Miguel's father even from a distance, because he's not to blame for my mistakes." Arthur nodded slowly, acknowledging defeat. For the first time in his life, Ethan had made a major decision against his will. "You'll regret this," Arthur said, as a last attempt to maintain control. "It's possible," Ethan agreed, "but at least it will be my regret, not yours." With those words, Ethan walked out of the hospital, leaving behind not just his father, but an entire life of privilege, security, and submission. He didn't know where he would sleep that night, how he would pay his bills, or how he would survive without the family fortune. But for the first time in decades, he felt like he was living his own life. Now he had to find out if there was still a place for him in the lives of Chloe and Miguel. 3 months after leaving the hospital and confronting his father, Ethan woke up at 5 in the morning in the small apartment he had rented in the Bronx. A 400-square-foot studio, furnished with only the essentials: a twin bed, a second-hand wardrobe, a plastic table, and 2 chairs he had bought at a used furniture store. The walls were thin enough to hear his neighbors' lives. Babies crying, TVs blaring, family arguments, sounds that once would have bothered him, but now were part of a reality he was learning to accept. The alarm on his cell phone, a simple device he had bought to replace the imported smartphone he could no longer afford, rang insistently. Ethan got up, went through his morning routine in a tiny bathroom, and dressed in the uniform that had become his second skin. Black pants, a white shirt, and black synthetic leather shoes. The uniform of a waiter at La Trattoria Villa, where he had been working for 2 months. The first few weeks had been brutal, waking up early, being on his feet for 12 hours straight, carrying heavy trays, smiling at rude customers, earning a salary that barely covered his basic expenses. His hands, which had once only known the soft touch of imported fabrics and office paper, were now calloused from physical labor. His back ached constantly. His feet were always swollen. But there was something liberating about the exhausting routine. For the first time in his life, Ethan was earning his own money through his own effort. Every dollar at the end of the month represented hours of honest work, not dividends from an inheritance he had never truly deserved. The commute to the restaurant took an hour and a half on public transit. A bus and a subway ride, always crowded, always late. Ethan had traded his private driver and imported car for the early morning bus, sharing space with domestic workers, street vendors, and construction workers. People who had always existed around him but whom he had never really seen. During the first few weeks, some of these workers recognized him. Ethan Sterling, heir to one of the country's largest pharmaceutical empires, riding the bus from the outer boroughs. The photos had circulated on social media, accompanied by conspiracy theories and cruel jokes. The playboy who went broke, from millionaire to waiter, the fall of Ethan Sterling. For a few days he had been the target of curious stares, poorly disguised whispers, and photos taken without permission. But New York was a big city, and the scandals of the elite didn't last long in the public memory. After a few weeks, Ethan had become just another anonymous worker in the crowd. La Trattoria Villa was in the West Village, a mid-sized establishment specializing in Italian food, frequented mainly by young professionals and middle-class couples. Nothing too fancy, but clean, organized, with good food and fair prices. Ethan had gotten the job through a temp agency, deliberately omitting his true identity from his resume. His boss, Marco, was a 50-year-old man who had worked his entire life in the restaurant business. He had started as a kitchen helper as a teenager, and through hard work had managed to open his own place. He was demanding but fair, strict about schedules, but understanding of personal difficulties. He had hired Ethan based on the impression that he was a guy who needs a chance, without suspecting his true origins. "Ethan," Marco greeted him when he arrived at the restaurant at 6 in the morning to help with lunch prep. "How's it going, man?" "Good, Marco. Ready for another day." Ethan had started going by his full name at work. It was simpler, more direct. Over the months, he had developed genuine relationships with his co-workers, hard-working people who had welcomed him without judgment, without knowing his past. Maria, the head cook, was a 45-year-old woman from Puerto Rico who was single-handedly supporting 4 children. She always came to work with a smile, regardless of the personal problems she faced. Carlos, another waiter, was a night student studying business who worked to pay for college. Linda, the cashier, was a retiree who had returned to the workforce to supplement her insufficient social security income. These people had become more than co-workers. They were true friends who had taught him about solidarity, about dignity in work, about finding joy in simple things. Ethan discovered there was more humanity in that small restaurant than in all the high society parties he had attended throughout his life. "Ethan, can you cover the afternoon shift?" Maria asked as she prepared the tomato sauce. "Carlos can't make it. His daughter is sick." "Of course," Ethan replied without hesitation. "No problem." In the first few months after leaving the company and his family, Ethan had tried to contact Chloe several times. Unanswered calls, unread messages, ignored emails. She had made it clear she didn't want to talk, that she wasn't interested in hearing excuses or justifications. Ethan had respected her decision, but he hadn't given up completely. Instead of insisting on direct contact, He had started to follow her life from a distance, always respecting boundaries, always staying invisible. He found out she worked at Bellevue Hospital in the pediatric department with an intense schedule that included night shifts. That she lived in a rented apartment in Astoria, Queens, a simple but well-kept two-bedroom. That she used a community daycare where she left Miguel during some work periods, but that most of the time she relied on the help of Mrs. Rodriguez, a 60-year-old woman who looked after neighborhood children. Ethan wasn't stalking Chloe. He was being careful, respectful, but determined to find a way to get closer without being invasive. It was during one of these discreet observations that he discovered something that made him take a radical step. On a Thursday afternoon, Ethan had called in sick to work, a lie that made him uncomfortable but one he deemed necessary. He followed Chloe discreetly when she left the hospital, keeping enough distance not to be noticed. He saw her stop at a small supermarket and watched through the window as she shopped. It was then that he witnessed a scene that broke his heart. Chloe was at the checkout trying to pay for her groceries when she realized she didn't have enough money. She opened her wallet, counted the bills twice, checked if she had forgotten a card. Nothing. She was clearly embarrassed, speaking quietly with the cashier, trying to decide which items to leave behind. Ethan watched as she removed a can of formula, a package of diapers, and some toiletries from her cart. She left only the basics: rice, beans, pasta, a few vegetables, the bare essentials for survival. The scene devastated him. Chloe, a competent and dedicated doctor, the mother of his child, struggling financially while he had wasted fortunes on trivial things his entire life. Miguel, his son, perhaps needing things Chloe couldn't afford. That night, Ethan made a decision. He started frequenting the same supermarket at times when he knew Chloe usually shopped. Not to meet her, in fact he was careful not to be seen, but for something different. He spoke with the manager, explained that he wanted to help a family that was going through a hard time, and arranged a system. Every week Ethan deposited an amount into the supermarket's account, specifying that it was for credit for Dr. Chloe Davis. It wasn't much. His waiter's salary didn't allow for grand gestures, but it was enough to ensure she could buy milk for Miguel, diapers, toiletries, a few comfort items. The manager had agreed to maintain total anonymity. To Chloe, the credit would be explained as a hospital social program or something similar. She would never know it came from Ethan. For weeks, Ethan observed the effects of his anonymous help from afar. He saw the relief on Chloe's face when the manager explained the credit. He saw how she was able to buy things for Miguel that she couldn't before. Small gestures that made a big difference in her life, but Ethan knew that money wouldn't solve everything. Chloe was still alone, still carrying the weight of motherhood without support, still working exhaustively to support herself and her son, and Miguel was growing up without knowing his father. That's when Ethan decided to take the next step. On a Saturday morning, he went to the community daycare center where he knew Miguel sometimes stayed. Not to try to contact the child, he knew that would be invasive and possibly traumatic, but to talk to Ms. Peterson, the daycare coordinator. "Good afternoon," he said when she received him in the small room that served as her office. "My name is Ethan, and I'd like to ask about volunteering." Ms. Peterson, a 60-year-old woman with endless energy, looked at him curiously. "What kind of volunteer work?" "Anything you need," Ethan answered honestly. "Cleaning, organizing, playing with the kids, whatever is necessary." "Do you have experience with children?" The question was inevitable, and Ethan had to improvise. "Not much, but I'm willing to learn," he said. "I've been going through some changes in my life, and I feel like I want to do something useful, something that makes a difference." There was truth in that explanation, even if it was incomplete. Ethan really did want to do something useful, wanted to feel part of a community, wanted to contribute to something bigger than himself. "We always need extra help on Saturdays," Ms. Peterson said, after studying his face for a few moments. "The kids come for recreational activities while their parents work or rest. You could start by helping with games, story time, things like that." "That would be perfect. But first you need to provide some documents, get a basic background check, attend an orientation meeting." "No problem. Whatever it takes." Ethan went through the required bureaucracy and 3 weeks later was officially registered as a daycare volunteer. His first day was both terrifying and wonderful. 15 children between 2 and 6 years old, all full of energy, curiosity, and affection. Ethan had never spent so much time with young children and initially felt clumsy, insecure, unsure how to react to the crying, tantrums, and demands for attention. But the children were generous with their affection and patient with his inexperience. Soon he was on the floor playing with building blocks, reading storybooks, with different voices for each character, helping with puzzles and drying tears when someone got hurt. And it was on his 3rd Saturday of volunteering that he saw him. Miguel was in the nursery, playing with other babies his age, when Ethan arrived for another day of volunteer work. The child had grown in the month since their reunion at the hospital. Now 6 months old, he was starting to sit up on his own, grab objects with both hands, and smile at familiar faces. Ethan's heart raced when he saw his son, but he kept his composure. He couldn't show any behavior that might seem suspicious or inappropriate. "Who's that baby?" he asked casually to Tanya, one of the caregivers. "That's Miguel," she replied with obvious affection. "Dr. Davis's son. She works at the hospital and sometimes needs to leave him here on weekends when she's on call." "Does he come often?" "Not always, but fairly often. He's a sweetheart, very calm, very smart." Ethan spent the rest of the morning trying to focus on the activities with the other children, but his eyes inevitably drifted back to Miguel. He watched how his son interacted with toys, how he reacted to sounds, how he smiled when someone made funny faces at him. There was something magical about being in the same room as Miguel, being able to watch him grow, even from a distance. Ethan knew he couldn't get too close. It would be unfair to the child and invasive to Chloe, but just being there, seeing that Miguel was well cared for, well fed and happy, was a blessing. Over the following weeks, Ethan established a routine. He worked at the restaurant from Monday to Friday, took overtime whenever possible, and dedicated his Saturdays to volunteering at the daycare. Gradually, he became a familiar presence to the children and caregivers. Ms. Peterson had noticed his dedication and often commented on how much the children liked him. "You have a natural way with them," she said one Saturday afternoon. "Have you ever thought about working in early childhood education?" "I hadn't thought about it before," Ethan replied, watching a group of children playing with paints, "but I'm discovering I really enjoy it." It was true. Volunteering had become the part of the week he looked forward to the most. There was something deeply gratifying in seeing the children's smiles, in knowing he was contributing to their development, in being part of a community that truly cared for one another. And there was always the chance of seeing Miguel. On the days his son was at the daycare, Ethan was especially careful not to seem too interested, but he took every opportunity to observe him. He saw when Miguel started to crawl, when he uttered his first syllables, when he began to show a preference for certain toys. It was a form of long-distance fatherhood, painful but precious. Ethan was missing the major milestones of Miguel's childhood. He wouldn't be the one to teach his son to walk, to say his first words, to discover the world, but at least he was present in some way. One Saturday, something different happened. Ethan was helping the older children with a painting activity when he heard a familiar voice talking to Miss Peterson at the front desk. "Thank you for taking such good care of Miguel," Chloe was saying. "I know I'm extra trouble with my irregular hours." "Not at all, Doctor," Miss Peterson replied. "Miguel is a blessing, and you know you can always count on us." Ethan's pulse quickened. Chloe was there, just a few feet away, probably coming to pick up Miguel after a shift at the hospital. He tried to focus on the activity with the children, but he was hyper-aware of every word of the conversation at the front desk. "How did he do today?" Chloe asked. "Very well. He ate all his food, napped on time, and played a lot with the other babies. Oh, and we have a new volunteer who's great with the kids. Ethan." Ethan's blood ran cold when Miss Peterson mentioned his name. He hadn't considered the possibility of Chloe discovering his presence at the daycare through the caregivers. "Ethan?" Chloe repeated, and Ethan could hear the curiosity in her voice. "Yes, a very dedicated young man. He comes every Saturday. The kids adore him. Very caring, very responsible." Ethan continued painting with the children, trying to look absorbed in the activity, but his ears were completely focused on the conversation. There was a small chance Chloe might come to the activity room to see who this volunteer named Ethan was. "That's great," Chloe said finally. "It's important to have dedicated people looking after the children." "Exactly. Well, I'll go get Miguel for you." Ethan heard footsteps, moving away, and breathed a sigh of relief. Chloe hadn't shown any interest in meeting the mysterious volunteer. For now, his anonymity was preserved. But the situation made him realize he was walking a fine line. Sooner or later, Chloe would find out he was at the daycare. And when that happened, he would have to be prepared to explain his motivations honestly and respectfully. In the meantime, Ethan continued his double life. A waiter during the week, a volunteer on Saturdays, always watching from a distance the woman he loved and the son he was slowly getting to know. He knew he couldn't go on like this indefinitely. At some point, he would have to find the courage to approach Chloe directly, to try for an honest conversation, to ask for a chance to explain what had happened and what he was trying to build. But for now, he was learning something he had never experienced before. Patience. He was learning to wait, to work for something with no guarantee of success, to show love through consistent actions rather than grand gestures. It was a painful but necessary lesson. And maybe, just maybe, it was the first step toward regaining the trust of the woman he had lost and building a real relationship with the son he didn't yet know. The first direct encounter between Ethan and Chloe, after months of long-distance observation, happened completely unexpectedly, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon that would definitively change the course of their lives. Ethan was on his way home from work, soaked by a sudden downpour, when he saw a woman running down the sidewalk with a child in her arms, trying to shield them from the storm. He recognized Chloe immediately, even with her wet hair plastered to her face and the desperate look of someone running late for an important commitment. Miguel was crying in his mother's arms, frightened by the sound of thunder and uncomfortable with the rain hitting them, despite Chloe's efforts to protect him. She was running toward a bus stop that offered little shelter. Clearly late and unsure how to handle the situation, Ethan didn't think twice. He pulled an umbrella from his backpack, a basic item he had learned to always carry after months of relying on public transportation, and ran toward her. "Chloe!" he shouted over the noise of the rain, holding the umbrella over her. "And Miguel." She turned, surprised, and for a moment their eyes met. Ethan saw recognition, then confusion, and finally a mix of gratitude and discomfort. "Ethan," she said, trying to catch her breath, "what are you doing here?" "Coming home from work," he replied, keeping the umbrella over them. "Are you okay? Is Miguel okay?" The question about his son sounded natural, caring, and Ethan realized Chloe noticed the familiar tone he had used when referring to the baby. "We're fine," she answered, automatically shielding Miguel. "We just got caught in the rain." "Where do you need to go? Can I help?" Chloe hesitated. Accepting help from Ethan meant prolonging an encounter she had carefully avoided for months. But Miguel was wet and scared, and she really needed to get to the hospital for a shift that started in less than an hour. "I need to get to Bellevue," she said finally. "I have a shift and the daycare closed early because of an electrical problem." Ethan understood the situation immediately. Chloe had nowhere to leave Miguel and couldn't take a baby to the hospital during a shift. It was the kind of dilemma single mothers faced constantly, especially those without a close family support network. "I can watch him," Ethan said, surprising them both with the spontaneous offer. "What?" Chloe looked at him as if he had suggested something absurd. "While you're at work," Ethan explained, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I know how to take care of kids. I volunteer at a daycare." The information caught Chloe off guard. Ethan volunteering didn't fit the image of the rich, selfish man she had built in her memory. "Ethan, I can't," she began, but Miguel chose that moment to cry louder, clearly uncomfortable and cold. "Let's at least get out of the rain," Ethan suggested, guiding them to the shelter of a storefront. "Then you can decide." They squeezed under the small awning, and Ethan could see Chloe up close for the first time in months. She was thinner, more tired, but there was something in her eyes he didn't remember from before. A steely determination, a strength forged in adversity. Miguel had stopped crying and was now looking curiously at Ethan. It was the first time father and son had seen each other so close, and Ethan felt a visceral connection to the child. Miguel's eyes were a mix of his own and Chloe's, and there was something in the way the baby watched him that felt familiar. "Hey, little guy," Ethan said softly, and Miguel responded with a smile that made Ethan's heart nearly stop. "He doesn't usually smile at strangers," Chloe commented, clearly surprised by her son's reaction. "Maybe he remembers me," Ethan said without thinking, then realized how the sentence sounded. "Remembers you?" Chloe asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Ethan realized he had exposed himself. He couldn't explain that he spent Saturdays watching Miguel at the daycare without sounding like a stalker, but he couldn't lie either. I've seen him a few times at the daycare where I volunteer," he admitted, "but I've always respected the boundaries, Chloe. I never tried to approach him, never asked for information about you." The revelation left Chloe silent for a few moments, processing the information. Ethan was frequenting the same daycare where she left Miguel. It wasn't a coincidence. "For how long?" she asked. 2 months, Ethan admitted. "But I swear, Chloe, I never—" "Are you following me?" Her voice grew harsher. "No," Ethan answered firmly. "I became a volunteer because I wanted to do something useful, something that made a difference. And when I found out Miguel sometimes stayed there, I couldn't resist being in the same room with him, even from a distance." Chloe studied his face, looking for signs of lies or manipulation, but there was a painful sincerity in Ethan's words that was hard to fake. "Why didn't you try to talk to me before?" she asked. "Because you made it clear you didn't want to talk, and I respect that," Ethan said. "But that doesn't mean I stopped caring about you two." The rain continued to fall heavily, and Miguel started to fidget in his mother's arms. Chloe checked her watch and realized she was running out of time to resolve the situation. "Chloe," Ethan said softly, "I know you have no reason to trust me. I know I was terrible to you, that I hurt you in an unforgivable way. But Miguel is my son too, and I would really like to help at least this once." The word son echoed between them like a confession. It was the first time Ethan had openly acknowledged his paternity in a conversation with Chloe. "You can't just show up in my life and want to be a father after all these months," Chloe said, but her voice lacked the expected harshness. "I know," Ethan agreed. "And that's not what I'm doing. I'm offering help in a difficult situation. Nothing more." Chloe looked at Miguel, who had calmed down and was now playing with a button on Ethan's shirt. There was something in the interaction between father and son that seemed natural, organic. "How do I know I can trust you with him?" she asked. "You don't," Ethan admitted honestly. "But I can give you references from the daycare where I work. Ms. Peterson can confirm that I spend entire Saturdays taking care of children." The mention of the daycare coordinator gave weight to Ethan's words. Chloe had known Ms. Peterson for months and trusted her judgment. "And where would you stay?" Chloe asked, starting to seriously consider the offer. "At my place. It's small, but it's clean and safe. Or at a friend of yours' house, if you prefer." "I don't know your place." "Then you can see it now, before you decide," Ethan suggested. "It's 10 minutes from here." Chloe weighed her options. She could try calling a co-worker, but it was last minute and she had used that favor so many times she felt embarrassed to ask again. She could miss her shift, but that would affect her residency evaluation and compromise her income for the month. "Okay," she said finally, "but I want to see where you live, check out the place, and I want your number so I can call you every hour." "Of course," Ethan agreed immediately. "Any condition you want." Ethan's apartment surprised Chloe. Not because of its simplicity, she had expected it to be modest, but because of its cleanliness and organization. It was small but cozy, with a few books on child development on the table and educational toys he had bought for his volunteer work. "You really prepared for this," Chloe commented, looking at the toys appropriate for Miguel's age. "I bought them for the activities at the daycare," Ethan explained, then added honestly, "but I also thought that maybe one day I could use them with Miguel." Chloe checked the temperature of the room, made sure there were no dangerous objects within a child's reach, and watched how Ethan interacted with Miguel. Her son seemed comfortable with his father, which was simultaneously reassuring and unsettling. "He can sleep here." Ethan indicated an area of the sofa he had improvised as a temporary crib with clean pillows and blankets. "Did you just do this now?" Chloe asked. "I always keep the apartment ready for kids," Ethan said. "You never know when it might be necessary." The answer revealed a level of planning and hope that touched Chloe more than she wanted to admit. "All right," she said finally, "but I'm going to call every hour, and if anything goes wrong—" "You'll kill me," Ethan completed with a small smile. "Understood." Chloe quickly went over the instructions for Miguel's routine: feeding time, how to prepare the bottle, how to get him to sleep, signs that he was hungry, thirsty, or needed a diaper change. Ethan listened attentively, asking specific questions, showing he was taking the responsibility seriously. "Your phone," she said, holding out her cell. Ethan typed in his number, and for the first time in months they had direct contact. It was a small but significant step. "Chloe," he said, as she was about to leave, "thank you for trusting me, even if it's just this once." "Don't let me down," she replied, looking one last time at Miguel, who was comfortably in Ethan's arms. After Chloe left, Ethan was alone with his son for the first time. It was simultaneously the most terrifying and most rewarding moment of his life. Miguel was a calm baby, but being completely responsible for his well-being for several hours was an enormous responsibility. Ethan prepared the bottle exactly as Chloe had instructed, tested the temperature, and offered it to Miguel, who accepted without resistance. He changed diapers, played with simple toys, and walked around the small apartment humming songs he didn't know where he had learned. When Miguel fell asleep, Ethan sat beside him just watching. This was his son. This small, perfect child was a part of him, shared his DNA, his physical traits, maybe even some personality characteristics. The phone rang exactly 1 hour after Chloe had left. "How is he?" she asked without preamble. "Sleeping," Ethan answered quietly. "He drank the whole bottle, played a little, and now he's fast asleep." "He didn't cry?" "A little bit when you left, but he calmed down quickly." Ethan could hear the relief in Chloe's breath. "Okay, I'll call in an hour." And she did. And she continued to call every hour throughout her 12-hour shift. Ethan answered every call patiently, reporting every detail of Miguel's routine, reassuring Chloe about her son's well-being. When Chloe returned the next morning, she found Ethan asleep on the floor next to the sofa where Miguel was resting, clearly having spent the night watching over the child's sleep. "Ethan," she called softly. He woke up immediately, alert. "How is he?" was the first thing he asked. "He's fine. The question is, how are you?" Chloe said, noticing the uncomfortable position he had slept in. "I'm great," Ethan said, getting up and stretching his sore back. "Miguel is a wonderful baby. It was very easy to take care of him." Chloe looked around the apartment. It was more organized than when she had left. The bottles were washed and sterilized. The dirty diapers were properly bagged in the trash. Miguel was clean, smelled fresh, and was visibly well cared for. "Thank you," she said, and there was genuine emotion in her voice. "Seriously, thank you. You saved my life yesterday." "It was my pleasure," Ethan said, and he truly meant it. "I loved every minute of it." Chloe picked Miguel up, checking, to see if he was really okay, if there were any signs of stress or discomfort, but her son was calm, smiling, and clearly comfortable. "How was your shift?" Ethan asked. "Long, difficult, but I was able to focus because I knew Miguel was in good hands." The admission was significant. Chloe had trusted him with the most precious thing in her life, and he had lived up to that trust. "Chloe," Ethan said hesitantly, "I know I have no right to ask this, but would you have coffee with me to talk?" She hesitated. The conversation they had avoided for months, the explanation he so desperately wanted to give, the clarification she perhaps needed to hear as well. "Not here," she said finally, "and not now, but maybe." It was more than Ethan had hoped for. "Whenever you want," he said. "Wherever you choose." Chloe nodded and prepared to leave. Ethan walked her to the door, watching as she settled Miguel into his stroller. "Chloe," he said before she left, "if you ever need help again, with anything, you can call me." "Okay," she replied, and for the first time in months she smiled at him. A small, cautious, but genuine smile. After she left, Ethan stood in the empty apartment, still smelling the baby scent in the air, still seeing the toys scattered on the floor. He had spent less than 24 hours with his son, but something fundamental had changed in his life. For the first time he had experienced true fatherhood, not the abstract idea of having a child, but the concrete reality of being responsible for a small, dependent baby. And it had been the most fulfilling experience of his life. He had also had the first civil conversation with Chloe in almost a year. They hadn't resolved anything, hadn't talked about the past, but they had established a minimal foundation of trust. It was a start, small, fragile, but real. 2 weeks later, Chloe called again. Another emergency shift, another situation where she needed help with Miguel. Ethan didn't hesitate to offer, and this time the experience was even more natural. He had bought more age-appropriate toys for Miguel, had studied child development, and had prepared himself even better to care for his son. Chloe noticed his efforts and began to relax a little more when leaving Miguel with him. It was on the third babysitting occasion that something definitively changed. Ethan was giving Miguel a bath when the baby said his first clear word. "Dada!" Ethan froze, thinking he had imagined it. But Miguel repeated it. "Dada, dada," looking directly at him. When Chloe arrived to pick up her son, Ethan was visibly emotional. "What happened?" she asked, concerned. "He talked," Ethan said, his voice breaking with emotion. "He said, 'Dada.'" Chloe looked at Miguel, who smiled and repeated, "Dada." "He's calling you Dad," she said softly, more to herself than to Ethan. It was impossible to deny the reality. Miguel had chosen Ethan as a father figure, had created a bond that transcended genetics or constant presence. There was something instinctive, natural, in the relationship between father and son. "Chloe," Ethan said, seizing the moment, "would you have dinner with me? To talk about everything?" This time she didn't hesitate as much. "Okay," she said, "but there's something you need to know first." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. There was something in Chloe's voice that indicated a complication. "What?" "There's someone else in my life," she said, direct as always. "Someone who was with me through the whole pregnancy, who supported me when you abandoned me, who helps with Miguel." The information hit Ethan like a punch. During all those months planning to win her back, he had considered many difficulties, but he hadn't seriously thought about the possibility of another man. Are you... Ethan couldn't finish the question. "It's complicated," Chloe replied. "That's why we need to talk. There's a lot to clear up." Ethan felt the ground open up beneath him. Not only would he have to win back Chloe's trust and make up for lost time with Miguel, he would have to compete with someone who had been present when he had been absent, who had offered support when he had offered abandonment. The reconciliation that already seemed difficult had just become seemingly impossible. But looking at Miguel, who kept repeating "Dada" with a smile on his face, Ethan knew he wouldn't give up. No matter who the competition was, no matter how hard the fight, he had lost almost a year of his son's life and the woman he loved. He wouldn't lose any more time. "Whenever you want to talk," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I'm ready to hear everything." And he was, even if the truth might break his heart into pieces for good. The dinner took place at a small pizzeria in Astoria, near Chloe's apartment. Ethan had suggested a more upscale place, but she had insisted on something simple, familiar, where she would feel comfortable having a conversation she knew was crucial for all their futures. Miguel was with Mrs. Rodriguez, the neighbor who often helped Chloe with the baby. Ethan had arrived early, more nervous than he had ever been before a date. The past few weeks of occasionally caring for Miguel had created an unexpected routine, but this would be the first time he and Chloe would sit down to talk honestly about everything that had happened. When she arrived, Ethan was once again surprised by the change in her. Chloe wore a simple dress, her hair down, with light makeup. She was more relaxed than the last few times they had seen each other, but there was something in her eyes that indicated the seriousness of the conversation they were about to have. "Thanks for agreeing to meet here," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "Thank you for giving me this chance," Ethan replied, studying her face, memorizing details he had forgotten during the months of separation. They ordered a simple pizza and 2 beers. The atmosphere was casual, but the tension between them was palpable. There was so much to be said, so much to be clarified, so much to be forgiven or understood. "I'll get straight to the point," Chloe said after the waiter left. "You want to know about him?" Ethan nodded. The curiosity about the other man had been consuming him since she had mentioned his existence. "It's Dr. Mark Peterson," Chloe began, nervously fiddling with her napkin. "He's the head of pediatrics at Bellevue, my direct supervisor in the residency program." Ethan felt an immediate pang of jealousy. A doctor, someone from Chloe's professional world, someone who shared her passions and ambitions in a way he never could. "He's 42, divorced, has 2 kids from a previous marriage," Chloe continued, and Ethan realized she was providing objective information, as if reporting data from a medical chart. "Are you together?" Ethan asked, getting straight to the question that terrified him most. "It's complicated," Chloe repeated the answer she had given before. "When you broke up with me, when you rejected me in the cruelest way possible, I was devastated, pregnant, alone, rejected by the man I thought I loved. Mark was the one who supported me." Ethan closed his eyes, imagining Chloe going through that period alone, dealing with the pregnancy, with work, with the emotional pain, while he was planning a future with someone else. "Did he know about me?" Ethan asked. "He knew. I told him everything, about our relationship, how it ended, about the pregnancy." Chloe paused. "Mark offered me support without expecting anything in return. Throughout the entire pregnancy, he was there. At doctors' appointments, when I was sick, when I was scared." Every word was a stab to Ethan's chest. Mark had done everything he should have done. He had been the man Ethan hadn't had the courage to be. "And at the birth?" Ethan asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. "He was there," Chloe confirmed. "He held my hand, encouraged me. He was the first man to hold Miguel after he was born." The image of another man holding his newborn son, supporting Chloe in the most important moment of her life, was almost unbearable for Ethan. Mark had experienced everything Ethan had lost due to pride and cowardice. "Do you love him?" Ethan asked, his voice coming out weaker than he intended. Chloe hesitated, and Ethan realized she was struggling with her own answer. "I'm grateful to him," she said finally. "He's a good man, an excellent doctor, a dedicated father to his own children. He offered me stability when my life was falling apart." "That doesn't answer my question," Ethan gently insisted. "No," Chloe admitted after a long silence. "I don't love him. Not the way I loved you. Not the way he deserves to be loved." The relief Ethan felt was immense, but it was accompanied by guilt. Mark seemed to be a genuinely good man who had done everything right, and yet he hadn't completely won Chloe's heart. "But he asked me to marry him," Chloe continued, and Ethan felt his world collapse again. "What?" he managed to say. "Last week, he said he loves me, that he loves Miguel as if he were his own son, that he wants us to be a real family." Ethan was silent, processing the information. Mark had taken the step he himself had been thinking of. Taking, but he had gotten there first. "And what did you say?" Ethan asked, dreading the answer. "I asked for time to think," Chloe said. "That's when you showed up that day in the rain, offering to help with Miguel. It was like the universe was forcing me to confront the past before making a decision about the future." The pizza arrived, but neither of them showed much interest in the food. The conversation was more important, more urgent. "Chloe," Ethan said, gathering his courage, "I know I have no right to ask this, but can I explain what happened? Why I ended things the way I did?" She nodded, indicating she was ready to listen. Ethan told her everything, about the fake photos, the intercepted conversations, the fabricated evidence his father had presented, about how he had blindly believed it, how the manipulation had been subtle and effective, How his fear of confronting his family had made it all easier. "My father orchestrated everything," Ethan explained, his voice heavy with guilt. "He knew you were the only person who could make me question the life he had planned for me. So he destroyed our relationship in the cruelest way possible." "And you believed him," Chloe said, not as an accusation but as a statement of fact. "Yes," Ethan admitted, "because it was easier to believe you were cheating on me than to face my father and fight for what I felt." "And when did you find out the truth?" "Too late," Ethan said simply. "You were already out of my life, already pregnant, already finding support in Mark. I had lost everything because of my cowardice." Chloe was silent for a long moment, absorbing the revelations. Ethan could see she was processing not just the information but also the emotions it brought up. "Why are you only telling me this now?" she finally asked. "Because first I needed to become someone worthy of asking for forgiveness," Ethan replied. "The man who broke up with you that day didn't even deserve to talk to you. I needed to change. I needed to prove, mostly to myself, that I was capable of being different." "And you think you've changed?" Ethan thought about the question honestly. In the last few months, he had worked hard, lived simply, dedicated himself to volunteering, and learned about responsibility and humility in ways he had never experienced before. "I don't know," he answered honestly, "but I'm trying. Every day I'm trying to be the man you deserved from the beginning." Chloe studied his face, looking for signs of sincerity or manipulation, but there was a painful transparency in Ethan that was hard to fake. "And what do you want from me now?" she asked. "A chance," Ethan said without hesitation. "Not to go back to what we were, because that's impossible, but to build something new. For me to be a real father to Miguel. For us to find out if there's still something between us worth fighting for. And if there isn't?" The question was fair, and Ethan had thought about it many times. "Then at least I will have tried," he said. "And I'll continue to be Miguel's father, if you'll let me, because he's not to blame for my mistakes." Chloe smiled for the first time since the conversation had begun. There was something about Ethan's dedication to his son that touched her deeply. "Mark can offer Miguel stability," she said. "Financial security, a structured family, older siblings to play with. He can give Miguel everything a child needs." "And what can I offer?" Ethan asked, knowing the answer would be painful. "Unconditional love," Chloe replied, surprising him. "You can offer the love of a real father. I've seen how you look at him, how he reacts to you. There's something between you that's genuine, natural." "And between us?" Ethan dared to ask. Chloe hesitated again, struggling with feelings she had tried to bury for months. "I still love you," she finally admitted, her voice low but firm. "I tried to stop. I tried to move on. I tried to convince myself that Mark would be enough, but I still love you." The words hit Ethan with the force of a divine revelation. After all the mistakes, all the pain, all the separation, she still felt something for him. "But love isn't enough," Chloe continued, and Ethan felt his hope waver. "I need guarantees. I need to know you won't run away at the first sign of trouble, that you won't abandon me again when your father puts pressure on you." "Chloe," Ethan began, but she interrupted him. "I need to know that you chose Miguel and me of your own free will, not as a form of rebellion against your family. Because if that's what this is, when the rebellion is over, you'll just leave us again." The observation was sharp and fair. Ethan realized he needed to prove that his changes were genuine and permanent. "How can I prove that?" he asked. "I don't know," Chloe admitted. "That's an answer you have to find on your own." They finished their dinner in thoughtful silence. Ethan walked Chloe to her apartment building, and they said goodbye with a hesitant hug, filled with unexplored possibilities. "Can I keep helping with Miguel?" Ethan asked before she went inside. "Yes," Chloe replied. "He needs his father, regardless of what happens between us." It was more than Ethan had dared to hope for. At least he would stay in contact with his son while he tried to figure out how to win back Chloe's trust. 3 weeks later, just as Ethan was starting to believe there might be a real chance to rebuild his family, the past returned with all its destructive force. Arthur Sterling showed up at the restaurant where Ethan worked on a busy Thursday afternoon. Dressed impeccably, exuding power and authority, he was completely out of place in the simple setting of La Trattoria Villa. Ethan was serving a table when he saw his father sitting in a corner, watching him with the expression of someone appraising a property. The impact was immense. In the months since their confrontation at the hospital, Ethan had managed to create a life separate from his family, an existence where he didn't have to constantly think about his father's approval or disapproval. But Arthur's presence brought back all the insecurities, all the fears, all the patterns of behavior Ethan had tried to leave behind. "Excuse me," Ethan said to the customers he was serving. "I'll be right back." He approached the table where Arthur was sitting, his heart pounding. "Dad," he said, keeping his voice low. "Ethan," Arthur replied, looking around the restaurant with obvious disdain. "So this is how you're living now?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement loaded with disapproval. "It's an honest life," Ethan defended. "It's a wasted life," Arthur corrected. "But I'm here to offer you a chance to fix your mistakes." Ethan felt his stomach clench. He knew his father well enough to know that any offer would come with devastating conditions. What kind of chance? Arthur opened a briefcase he had brought with him, revealing documents Ethan recognized as business contracts. "Full reinstatement," Arthur said simply. "Come back to the company, resume your position as heir, get back everything you gave up. The fortune, the status, the power, everything." The words echoed in Ethan's mind like an almost irresistible temptation. Months of hard work, financial struggles, and constant worry about money could end with a single signature. "And the conditions?" Ethan asked, knowing there would be some. "Simple," Arthur said, as if discussing the weather. "You permanently abandon this obsession with the doctor and the child, cut off all contact, disappear from their lives, and allow them to move on without your interference." The proposal hit Ethan like a shot to the chest. His father was offering him everything he had lost in exchange for the only thing that truly mattered, his family. "You're asking me to abandon my son," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm offering you the chance to get your real life back," Arthur corrected. "That child has a substitute father who can offer stability. The doctor has a marriage proposal from a suitable man. They don't need you." "But I need them," Ethan replied, surprised by the firmness of his own conviction. "You think you do," Arthur said with forced patience, "but that's just unresolved guilt. You can have a much better life, build a proper family, have legitimate children with a woman of your own class." The reference to Miguel as an illegitimate child made Ethan feel a rage he hadn't experienced in months. "Miguel is my legitimate son," he said, his voice louder than he intended. A few customers looked their way. "He's a bastard born from an inappropriate relationship," Arthur retorted coldly. "And if you insist on this fantasy of a happy family, you will lose everything, permanently." "I already lost everything when I obeyed you the first time," Ethan said, feeling a clarity he hadn't experienced in years. "Ethan, be rational," Arthur tried a more diplomatic approach. "You're 34 years old. You can marry a suitable woman, have legitimate children, build an empire even greater than mine, but only if you stop this foolishness now." Ethan looked at the documents on the table, then at his father, then at the restaurant where he had found more dignity than in any luxurious office he had ever occupied. "How old are you, Dad?" he asked. The question caught Arthur off guard. 62, why? "And are you happy?" "Happiness is a luxury businessmen can't afford," Arthur answered automatically. "So you've spent 62 years building an empire, but you've never been happy," Ethan said, more a statement than a question. "I built something that will last for generations," Arthur defended himself. "For what? For whom? For me?" Ethan questioned. "I don't want your empire if it means giving up my family." "That woman is not your family," Arthur exploded, momentarily losing his composure. "She's a distraction, an obsession, a fantasy. She's the mother of my son," Ethan replied with absolute calm. "And I love her." "Love doesn't pay the bills, it doesn't build legacies, it doesn't secure a future." "No," Ethan agreed. but it ensures a life worth living." Arthur was silent for a few moments, studying his son's face, looking for signs that he could still influence his decision. "If you refuse this offer," he said finally, "there won't be another one. Ever. You will be officially disinherited, cut off from the family, banished from our social circle." "And Miguel," Ethan asked, "will my son also be banished from your social circle?" "That child will never be recognized as a member of this family," Arthur said with absolute coldness. The statement was the moment of definitive clarity for Ethan. His father was willing to reject his own grandson to maintain control over his son. There was no love in that proposal, only power and manipulation. Ethan stood up from the table, took the documents Arthur had brought, and without hesitation tore them in half. "So you've made your choice," Arthur said, watching the pieces of paper fall to the floor. "Yes," Ethan confirmed. "I chose the family I love over the family that shames me." Arthur stood up as well, adjusting his suit as if preparing to leave a contaminated environment. "You will regret this decision for the rest of your life," he said like a final curse. "Maybe," Ethan admitted, "but at least it will be my decision, not yours." Arthur left the restaurant without looking back, and Ethan knew he would probably never see his father again. It was a terrifying and at the same time liberating freedom. Marco, who had watched the scene from a distance, approached Ethan. "You okay, man?" "Better than ever," Ethan replied, and he realized it was true. That night, Ethan called Chloe. "Can I see you? It's urgent." She agreed to meet him at the same place where they had had dinner weeks before. When Ethan told her about his father's visit, the proposal, and his definitive answer, Chloe was silent for a long time. "Are you sure?" she finally asked. "You gave up everything. Literally everything." "No," Ethan corrected. "I chose everything that really matters." Chloe studied him carefully, looking for signs of doubt, regret, or future resentment. But there was a peace in Ethan that she had never seen before. "And Mark?" he asked. "I talked to him yesterday," Chloe said. "I explained the situation, told him I needed more time to decide about the marriage." "And what did he say?" "That he would give me all the time I needed," Chloe smiled sadly. "He's too good of a man for me." "No," Ethan disagreed. "You deserve someone good. The question is, do you deserve someone who loves you the way I do?" The question hung in the air between them, filled with possibilities and hopes. "Ethan," Chloe said finally, "if we're going to try again, it has to be for real. No fear, no doubts, no turning back. Miguel can't go through another separation." "Neither can you," Ethan completed, "and neither can I. If we're going to try, it's forever." "Are you sure? A simple life, without luxuries, with the normal struggles of any middle-class family?" Ethan thought about the small apartment, the waiter job, the financial difficulties, the daily worries. Then he thought about Miguel saying, "Dada," and smiling at him, about Chloe trusting him with their son, about the possibility of waking up every day next to the woman he loved. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he replied. Chloe smiled, and for the first time in almost a year, Ethan saw in her smile the woman he had fallen in love with years ago. "Then let's try," she said, reaching her hand across the table. Ethan took her hand, feeling the firmness of the promise, the solidity of a love that had survived betrayal, abandonment, manipulation, and time. 6 months later, Ethan, Chloe, and Miguel were living together in the same small apartment in the Bronx. Ethan had been promoted to manager of La Trattoria Villa and had started taking night classes in business administration. Chloe had finished her residency and gotten a stable job at a local public hospital. It wasn't an easy life. Money was always a concern. Miguel woke up crying in the middle of the night, and the routine was hectic and exhausting. But for the first time in their lives, the three of them were genuinely happy. Mark had accepted Chloe's decision with the dignity that had always characterized him, had offered professional support whenever needed, and had eventually started a relationship with a colleague who could love him the way he deserved. Arthur Sterling never tried to contact his son again. The pharmaceutical empire continued to thrive under his leadership, but now without a designated heir. Ethan occasionally read about his father in business magazines, but felt only a distant sadness for the man who had chosen power over family. One Saturday night, while Miguel slept in the crib they had managed to buy on sale, Ethan and Chloe lay in the double bed that took up almost the entire small bedroom. "Do you have any regrets?" Chloe asked, as she did periodically since they had decided to try again. "About taking so long to make the right choices?" Ethan replied, pulling her closer. "Every single day." "That's not what I meant." "I know," Ethan smiled in the dark, "and the answer is no. I never regret it. Even when money is tight at the end of the month." "Especially when money is tight at the end of the month," Ethan said, "because it means we're building something that's ours, with our work, our choices, our love." Chloe snuggled into his chest, listening to the heartbeat that had become the soundtrack to her new life. "I love you," she murmured, the words that had taken almost 2 years to be said again. "I love you too," Ethan replied, kissing the top of her head. "I love you both more than anything in this world." From the crib next to the bed, Miguel let out a small sigh, as if he were dreaming. Ethan looked at his son, at the woman in his arms, at the small apartment filled with love. He had given up a fortune, an empire, social status. He had lost the family that raised him, the future that had been planned for him, the financial security he had always known. In return, he had gained a real family, a genuine love, and the certainty that he was finally living his own life. It was, without a doubt, the best deal he had ever made.